I'm Katie, and I'm currently taking the Real Estate Pre-License course through Metro Brokers Academy School for Real Estate. I want to invite you to study with me on my channel. We will review all the chapters individually, as well as the vocabulary you need to know within each chapter. So don't forget to like and subscribe at the end. Without further ado, let's move on to today's topic. Real Estate Exam Prep. Government Review with Katie Landers Does Real Estate. Before we get started, let's take a look at today's outline regarding government and all the things we will be covering. You can find this outline in the description below this video. After we review this chapter, you can also look forward to a chapter quiz and vocabulary, so don't forget to subscribe. Let's get started. Public controls affecting land use. Public restrictions stem from the police power of the government. States have a constitutional right to pass laws that regulate land use in order to provide for the safety, health, morals, and general well-being of the public. Land use planning. Land use planning is an organized effort to provide for the orderly growth of the community. Most cities have commissions or boards for this purpose. It starts with a study of every aspect of the area, and then economic activity is studied as well. A master plan is developed which serves as a blueprint for future development. The plan divides the community into land use districts including commercial, residential, industrial, multifamily, and recreational. These are also the areas in which zoning regulations will apply. Many communities also set aside historic districts, conservation districts, and buffer zones. Zoning ordinances regulate how each parcel of land may be used. They also regulate the density, the height, and the bulk of buildings, and in some cases, architectural styles and other aesthetics. Whenever zoning conflicts arise with deed restrictions, the strictest always applies. Remember that, the strictest always applies. You will see downzoning and spot zoning. Downzoning is the rezoning of a parcel to a lower density or less profitable use. Spot zoning is used to permit a small area to have a use inconsistent with the surrounding area. Special types of zoning. We have the aesthetic, bulk, directive, incentive, and exclusionary. Aesthetic is specific that architectural styles must be compatible. Bulk is designed to limit population growth and density in certain areas. One method is to use floor area ratio, also known as FAR, which is total floor area divided by the lot total or the lot area. Another tool of bulk zoning is employing setbacks, which are required distances from lot lines. Directives are used to encourage the highest and best use of the land. Incentive is an award-based system that encourages developers to meet certain physical, social, and cultural benefits. Exclusionary requires large lots and houses where people can't naturally afford it. Nonconforming use. Nonconforming use applies when zoning has been changed for a certain area. For example, it goes from being zoned as residential to commercial, or vice versa. Since zoning is not retroactive, existing building or businesses may not comply. They are grandfathered in. So, in simple terms, someone's house is zoned as residential use when they buy the house, but somewhere along the line it gets rezoned to commercial use. They are okay to live in the house and continue under residential use because they are grandfathered in. They already existed when the new zoning was created. However, if their house burns down or the building gets destroyed, the new building will then have to follow the current zoning commercial. Procedure to change zoning. 1. File a rezoning petition. 2. Public hearing is scheduled and notice is given. 3. The hearing is held. 4. The board makes a recommendation. 5. New local ordinances to rezone is initiated. 6. Appeal process can be used. 7. Variance can be requested to not change the zoning but to allow use for a purpose that does not comply. Request must show hardship. Building codes. Regulations designed to set the standards for construction materials, methods, and safety procedures are building codes. Plans must be provided to the building inspector. Once approved, a building permit is issued and work can begin. Each phase must be inspected. When the building inspector finds something not in compliance, work can be shut down. This is abatement. When complete and after final inspection, a certificate of occupancy is issued. Subdivision regulations. A parcel of land is divided into several smaller lots, generally for new construction. The developer must present plans to the planning board. The Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, ILSFDA, a federal law which is intended to protect consumers in the purchase of a lease of lots in a subdivision using any mean of interstate commerce. The law requires that a factual report be delivered to the buyer before entering into a purchase agreement. The purchaser has a 7-day right of rescission after receiving the report to change their mind. Exceptions: subdivisions where lots are improved or there are plans to improve within 2 years, subdivisions with all lots 20 acres or more, subdivisions with fewer than 25 lots, lots sold to builders, cemetery lots, commercial or industrial developments. Real property taxes. Most privately owned land is subject to real estate taxes based on the value of the property, which is your ad valorem taxes. There are 10 steps to the ad valorem tax process: budget, appropriation, levy, assessment, appeal, equalization, tax rate, tax calculations, tax exemptions, and tax collection. Budget is the taxing authority that must prepare an annual budget estimating needed income for the coming year. Appropriation is a legislative enactment after budget is approved. Legislature has to figure where to get the money and how to spend it. Levy is a taxing authority determined how taxes will be imposed on individuals and property. Assessment, the tax assessor determines the market value of a parcel of property. An assessment rate is then applied to the market value. Georgia is 40%, remember that. Appeal, property owner can appeal. Equalization is, in some cases, a board of equalization will create equalization factors to ensure fairness across jurisdictions. Tax rate is the total amount of the budget needed divided by the total assessed values equals the tax rate. The assessed values are derived from the assessment rolls. Tax calculations. Annual tax divided by mill rate times the assessed value, T divided by M times A. The mill rate is $1 per thousand, which equals 0.001, which equals 1 mil. Tax exemptions. Homestead exemption is used to encourage home ownership by reducing tax for assessed value. Tax abatement is used to temporarily suspend property taxes to encourage economic development. Tax collection is unpaid taxes become a lien on the property and take precedence over all other liens. A delinquent taxpayer has the right to redeem property before the tax sale by paying all outstanding taxes and penalties. This is the right of redemption. If a tax sale is held, the winning bidder will receive a tax certificate until a specified waiting period. Real property taxes. Other than ad valorem tax, you have special assessments. Special assessments are usually annual assessments for local improvements. These are called improved districts. Federal and state taxes. Interest paid on mortgage loan and property taxes are tax deductible. You have capital gains, federal estate tax, and state taxes. For capital gains, profit an investor makes from selling an asset for more than it was purchased, adjusted sales price minus the basis equals capital gains. Tax Relief Act of 1997 may exempt a homeowner if they own the home as a primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years. 500,000 married filing jointly and 250,000 single. Federal estate tax is a tax imposed on a deceased person's property. State taxes Most states charge a transfer tax for conveyance tax usually paid at closing by the seller. Federal Fair Housing Law. Fair housing laws are based on the legal and ethical concept that all Americans should be free to buy or rent a home wherever and whenever they wish. You have the Civil Rights Act of 1866. You have Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1968, Federal Fair Housing Act. And you have the Fair Housing Act Amendment of 1988. Civil Rights Act of 1866. All citizens of all races have the same right to buy, sell, lease, or hold real and personal property as people of the white race. Years after its passage, the Supreme Court negated the law with Plessy v. Ferguson. Separate but equal facilities were permissible. Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1968, Federal Fair Housing Act. This made it illegal to discriminate in the sale and rental of a residence because of race, color, religion, or national origin. In 1974, sex was added. In 1988, familial status and handicap were added by amendments. People in these categories were considered minorities regardless of the numbers. Many discriminatory practices are prohibited, including blockbusting, which is inducing people to sell in fear minorities are moving into the neighborhood, and redlining, which is a practice of lenders who refuse to make loans in certain areas for discriminatory reasons. Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1968 continued. There are some exceptions. Owner of a single-family dwelling, provided they don't have interest in more than 3 dwellings, did not employ a broker, no discriminatory ads were used, must currently reside in dwelling or be the most recent occupant. An owner renting in an owner-occupied 4-unit or less dwelling, provided no broker was used and no discriminatory ads were used either. Sell or rental of a dwelling owned by a religious organization, provided they do not discriminate in their membership. Property owned by a private club, provided they do not discriminate in their membership. Fair Housing Act Amendment of 1988. The Fair Housing Act Amendment of 1988 made it easier and less costly to file complaints. It also increased penalties in punitive damages. A guilt determination could result in a $55,000 fine for the first offense, or $110,000 for subsequent offenses. There can also be jail time. It also added 2 more protected groups. Handicapped. Handicapped are those with defects in sight, hearing, mentally ill, wheelchair-bound, and those with alcoholism, cancer, or AIDS. Then you also have familial status, having children under 18 or being in the process of acquiring a child. Housing for older people may restrict children under either of 2 circumstances. Housing intended and solely for people over 62, or a community in which at least 80% of the units have at least 1 occupant who is over 55 years old, adheres to applicable policies and HUD rules. Compliance with fair housing laws. The DOJ Civil Rights Division established a fair housing testing program where trained testers pose as legitimate buyers or tenants, checking for compliance. You have steering, which is limiting a prospect's choice of certain neighborhoods because of race, color, sex, religion, national origin, familial status, or handicap, also called slanting or channeling. Then we have blockbusting. This is the illegal practice of inducing homeowners in a neighborhood to sell their properties by calling attention to the possibility that minority families may be moving in, resulting in a lessening of property values, a decline in the quality of education, and an increase in crime. We also have less favorable treatment, treating minority customer or client less favorably than a non-minority customer or client. All parties must be treated alike. Discrimination. The licensee refuses to show properties to a minority prospect or refuses to present an offer. Improper listing. Improper listing can occur when a licensee takes a listing on a property knowing that the owner wishes to place restrictions on the properties to whom the property can be shown. Advertising. It's best to describe the property, not the buyer. The Federal Fair Housing Law specifically makes it unlawful to indicate any preference or limitation based on protected category. Equal Housing Opportunity, or HUD, administers the fair housing law through the Office of Equal Opportunity. One component is the equal opportunity posters that are required to be prominently displayed. Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act is primarily devoted to requiring that organizations and businesses make their services and their facilities accessible to customers and workers who are handicapped. The ADA also provides reasonable accommodations so the handicapped persons can perform their work. Penalties can be $55,000 for the first offense and $110,000 for subsequent. Lead Paint Hazard Reduction Act. Lead Paint Hazard Reduction Act was passed in 1992 and it imposes 5 basic requirements. 1. For dwellings built before 1978, sellers, landlords, and agents must disclose any known presence of lead-based paint in a residential or any component of that dwelling. 2. Prospective buyers or tenants must be given copies of any available records or reports dealing with the presence of lead. 3. They must provide a pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. 4. Purchasers must have 10 days or an agreed time prior to being obligated under a sales contract to conduct a risk inspection for the presence of lead paint. This can be waived. And number 5, sales agreements and leases must include a confirmation statement that the seller or landlord has complied with the required disclosures and notifications. There are some exceptions to the lead paint hazard reduction. 1. Property sold at foreclosure. 2. Rental property inspected and found free of lead. 4. Renewal of lease when disclosure has already taken place. 5. 0-bedroom dwellings. And 6. Housing for elderly and disabled where no child the age of 6 or under resides. The RRP rule, Renovation, Repair, and Paint, governs the procedures used to minimize exposure to lead-based paint hazards during renovation, repair, or painting. Only a trained, certified tech contractor can perform this work. Law applies to disturbance of lead paint in excess of 6 square feet in a room or 20 square feet on the exterior. The Federal Trade Commission. The Do Not Call Registry prohibits consumers from unwanted telemarketing calls. It prohibits telemarketer calls to phone number on the National Registry. Telemarketers have 31 days from the date the number appears on the registry to cease calling. Who's exempt? Political calls, charities, and calls from those conducting surveys. Are there exceptions? When a business relationship already exists with a person, or a consumer who has made an inquiry may be called for up to 3 months from the date of last inquiry. Or, lastly, permission has been granted to be contacted. The Do Not Call Registry also addresses solicitation calls in general and applies even if a call is made to an individual who has not placed their number on the registry. Solicitation calls can be placed only between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Let's talk Can-Spam Act of 2003, which controls the assault of non-solicited pornography and marketing. It was designed to control commercial email. It applies to both bulk and single email solicitations. Penalty of $16,000 may be imposed for each email sent. There are some requirements for compliance. False or misleading header information is prohibited and must identify the person or business that sent it. A valid postal address must be included. Subject line must be accurate. There must be a clear indication that the transmission is an advertisement or solicitation, and commercial email must provide a clear opt-out provision. Then we have the Federal Antitrust Law. The Sherman Antitrust Act is a federal law that protects the public from monopolistic practices and activities that endanger competition in the marketplace, restraint, or trade. Brokerage is viewed as a trade because it is commercial and for profit and is classified as interstate commerce. Violations can be fined up to $1 million and sentenced up to 10 years for individuals. Corporations can be fined up to $100 million. Now, one, we have compliance with antitrust law. Not only brokers and salespeople are liable, but also real estate boards, associations, and multiple listing services. Two, training licensees for compliance. Licensees must understand that the critical terms of a contract are never standard or non-negotiable. The Georgia Fair Business Act, FBPA, focus on the law is primarily advertising. The Georgia Uniform Deceptive Trade Practices Act, UDTPA, law deals primarily with price fixing and any other practices which restrict competition. And that's all I have for today's topic, folks. Thank you for studying with me, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.